Hi guys, Anne McKinnell here. Thanks for joining me for this photo editing case study. I want to share with you some fun techniques I've been working with lately. So I've got this cityscape image that I made in Shanghai, and what I'm going to do is give it an abstract, painterly kind of look. Alright, let's get started. The first thing you'll notice here, if you look at the histogram in the top right corner, is that the image is a little bit underexposed. And also I used an 18mm lens when I made this photo, so it appears to have distorted the scene and the buildings look like they're leaning inwards. So we're going to want to fix those things before we do anything else. And I'll also make some other basic adjustments in Lightroom before we move on to doing anything fancy. Okay, so I'm going to use a few different tools to correct this distortion before we get going on anything else. First of all, I'm going to go into lens correction and I'll click enable profile corrections, and that will try to make up for what the wide angle lens has done. I'm also going to use the crop tool, and I'll use the ruler, and I'll just go ahead and draw a line along the shoreline, and that will correct the distortion there. Close. And then I'm going to go into the transform tool, and I'm just going to click auto and see if Lightroom can figure out how to make these buildings stand up straight. And there we go, that looks pretty good. The buildings look like they're vertical now, and the horizon looks pretty horizontal. So that's great. Now there are some white corners on the edges here that had to be cropped out, so I'm going to use the crop tool. And I'm just going to move this down so I get as much of the water in the foreground as I can. And I will hold down the shift key to maintain the aspect ratio and just drag these top corners down until I can't see any more of the white. Okay, great. Now we have a much better starting place. So now I'm going to go through and make the regular adjustments to the raw file as I normally would. So start in color profile, I'm going to pick camera landscape. That's usually my favorite one. And I'm going to change the white balance to daylight, maybe increase the exposure a little bit, add some contrast. I'm going to reduce the highlights and increase the shadows a little bit. Whites and blacks, add some clarity. Maybe add a little bit of vibrance and saturation here to make the buildings really pop. I'm not going to do anything with tone curve, HSL, or split toning. So I'll just jump down here to the detail panel, and I want to add a bit of sharpening so those buildings look nice and crisp. And I'll add a bit of masking to that because I don't want to add any sharpening to the sky, just the buildings. So that looks pretty good there. And I did use ISO 400, so I'm going to add a little bit of noise reduction. Okay, and I think that's about it. Oh, I do want to check for some dust spots here, just to make sure that I don't have any dust spots. I'm going to click the Visualize Spots checkbox to make it easier to see them. And I do think I have a couple here, so I'm on the heal mode, and my brush is just a little bit bigger than the dust spot. So I'm just going to click on this one here, and I'll click on that one there, and I think that's it. I'll just turn the Visualize Spots off again. Click the H key to get rid of those white marks, and I think that that is all of them. Okay, I'll close that. And now what I'm going to do is use the backslash key to look at before and after. So that's the before we made any changes in Lightroom, and there's after. So that's a huge difference already. Now I could be finished here. You know, if I just wanted a straight photo, I might add a little vignette to this and call it done. And that probably is the version of the photo that will go in my portfolio. But I've also been playing around with some other fun things, and I thought I would try to make this a bit more of an abstract, painterly kind of image in Photoshop and see what that looks like. So I'm just going to go ahead now and take this over to Photoshop. So I'm going to go Photo, Edit in Adobe Photoshop. All right, here we are in Photoshop. So the first thing I'm going to do is just make a copy of this background layer so that I'm just preserving what this original looked like so I can look back at it later. So I'm going to just drag this down over the new layer icon and make a copy of that. So my idea here is to create a more abstract look by making a kind of echo, if you will, of these buildings, kind of make them look sort of stretched out. I remember when I was there that everything was a bit, kind of foggy, and it was raining really hard, so everything was a little bit blurry, even though the buildings are crisp. So I'm just going to try to replicate how I remember the scene being. So what I'm going to do is use the motion blur tool to add a bit of blur to the top of these images, top of these buildings, I mean. So I'll go Filter, Blur, and I'm going to pick Motion Blur. Okay, so this is creating a motion blur in the vertical direction. You can just change this to the other direction if you wanted a horizontal one, and you can change the distance of the blur. You can have it less blurry by going down here or more blurry by going there. I think that I liked it the way it was when it just opened at around 500, so let's try that. There we go. Okay, that looks good. You're probably thinking this looks crazy right now, but you'll see what I'm going to do. So obviously I don't want this applied to the whole image. I just want a little bit of this at the tops of the buildings. So I'm going to add a layer mask here. And by holding down the Option key, I'm going to get a black layer mask. So now I'm looking right through this adjustment that I made to the layer below. Okay, so I am going to now use a white brush, and I can paint on that effect anywhere I want it. So I'm going to click B from my brush tool, and I'm going to switch the background and foreground layers by clicking this little arrow here. So now I have a white brush, and I'm going to pick just a soft round brush. Okay, and I'm going to make it a bit bigger, and too big. Okay, that looks pretty good. And I'm going to make the opacity of this brush about 50%, say, by clicking the 5. Now I'm at 50%. Now I'm just going to kind of tap on above the buildings here to add that effect where I want it to be. Okay, so I'm just going to tap. Maybe a little bit there. And I can just keep tapping for, as much of this motion blur that I want to see. And if I make a mistake, I can just switch over to a black brush. Like over here, I think that I went a little bit too far towards the bottom. So I'm just going to switch to a black brush and get rid of some of that I added on. Okay, maybe a little bit added on, a little bit too much there. Don't want to blur the buildings themselves. And make it a little bit smaller. I don't really want to quite add it all to there. We go. Okay. I'm going to switch back to the white brush again and add a little bit more here. All right. I think that looks pretty good. Maybe just a bit more there. So I can turn this layer on and off by using this eyeball icon here, so you can see what I've done. There it is, sort of the straight image, and now I've added a bit of this motion blur that makes it look, the buildings look a little bit kind of stretched. So that's interesting. I think I like that. Now what I'm going to do is take this into Topaz Impression and see what kind of interesting painterly effects I can get there. So I want all of the pixels on one layer in order to do that. If I were to just take this layer into Topaz Impression, it would only take the parts that are white in this mask. So what I'm going to do is stamp a copy of both of these layers onto a new layer. And I do that by going, let's see if I can get this right, Command Option Shift E. There we go. So on a Mac, it's Command Option Shift E, and on a PC, it's Control Alt Shift E. So now that I have these all on one layer, I'm going to go ahead and open Topaz Impression. So I'll go Filter, Topaz Studio, and I'm just going to open up the main Topaz Studio. So Topaz Impression was originally its own plugin, and now it's inside of Topaz Studio. So what Topaz is doing is slowly bringing all their plugins to work inside of their free Topaz Studio. So I'm not a huge fan of Studio, but I love the plugins like Impression and Texture Effects. Those two are inside Studio now, whereas other ones like Adjust and Restyle are still outside of Studio. So it's a little bit confusing, but I think that it's worth it just to be able to get at these plugins, which I love. Okay, so I'm going to click this, what do you call this, a hot dog kind of icon here in the top left corner, and that allows me to switch in between, like this one's under Studio here, they come with the free Topaz Studio, and then the other plugins that I own are down here, like Clarity, Detail, Impression, Texture Effects, all that kind of stuff. So I guess I had Texture Effects open last time, so I'm going to close that and I'm going to open Impression. I have one in mind, and I think that it's under this Ancient category. So let's have a look in there. There are a whole pile of different things you can choose from in Impression, so it's really interesting just to go and have a browse through all of these different categories and see what you can find. Okay, so I'm going to go down here, and yeah, it's this one called Cracked Fresco. So I quite like this because it adds a really neat texture to the image that makes it look like the painting is kind of cracked. So yeah, I like that. You can make other adjustments to it in here within Studio, but since I'm using Photoshop anyway, it's easier to do it in Photoshop. So I'm just going to go ahead and click OK and apply this effect to that layer. All right, there it is. Now I'm going to go and rename this layer so I don't forget what I've done here, and I'm going to call it Topaz Impression Cracked Fresco. Okay. So I really like the way this looks on the sky, and I like the way it looks on the water in the foreground, but I don't want to completely cover up all of the detail of these buildings. So again, I'm going to add a layer mask on here, and this time I'll go with a white layer mask, and then I'm going to brush out where I don't want this effect to show. So I have my brush tool here, and I'm going to switch to a black brush, and I still have a soft round brush, that's fine, make it a little bit bigger. And what I'll do first is just go at 100%, and then I'll probably lower the percentage as I get close to the edges of the building. So I'm just going to kind of sweep across here at 100% and get all of this detail back. Okay, and make my brush a bit smaller, and I'm going to go at say 80% and just paint on where I can see these buildings. And I'll make my brush quite a bit smaller here just to get it on a little bit on this tower. Okay. So I don't want to get rid of all of this crackleture where we had the motion, but I think I want to get rid of some of it. So I'll take my opacity down to 50% by clicking 5. And I'll go back to the white brush. So I'm adding, anywhere I want to add this effect, I'm going to use the white brush. And if I want to remove the effect, I will use the black brush. So I'm going to add a little bit more in here. I'm just kind of tapping. And anywhere I think there's too much, like here there might be a bit too much, so I'm going to change the foreground and background color by using the X key. So now I'm using a black brush. I'll get rid of a little bit of it here. And X again, I'm going to add a little bit between these buildings. I think I want to remove a little bit right up on here, so I'm going to click X again. So I have black brush, getting rid of it. Okay, interesting. Maybe I'm going to add a little bit more down here. I don't want there to be too abrupt of an adjustment, so I'll change the opacity to 30% and just try to get this to blend in nice. Okay, well that's interesting. So I can use the eyeball icon here to turn this effect off and back on again, and just make sure that I've got it the way I want it. And you know, I think that I've just lost a little bit of the motion blur that I liked, so I think I'm going to go ahead and remove some more of this crackling from that effect. So I want the black brush, change that over to black, and I'll leave my opacity at 30%, and I'm just going to try to blend this in a little bit better, maybe remove some of the crackling above it to blend it into the higher part of the image a little bit. Go across here. Okay. 20%. I'm just trying to blend this in a bit more to the sky. Switching back to the white brush where I want to add it. And you can see what I'm doing here. I'm just, I'm just going back and forth between the white and the black brush, brushing in where I want this effect to be, and just kind of making it blend nicely. Okay, so again, I'll turn that eyeball off and on. So that's kind of interesting, isn't it? Now what I want to do is compare this with the original. So by holding down the Option key, I can click on the background layer. So that's how it was when it came out of Lightroom. And now here it is with the motion effect and that Topaz Impression effect. All right, so there's one more thing I'd like to do here, and that is I would like to add some rain. It was pouring when I made this image, and I think it would look kind of interesting if I could add some rain to this. So I'm going to add a new layer. And for my brush, well, I don't want the rain to be black. And I don't want the rain to be white either. So I'm going to pick maybe something like a 75% gray. Let's try that and see how it works. Okay, now I have a brush, and these are my brushes, and this is one that I have that's called Rain. If I go into the brush settings here, you can see in the spacing, I can change if I want, there to be, if I want the rain to be really dense, or if I want to space it out a little bit. So I'm going to go, something like that. I think looks good. And I can just take a shot at this and see what it looks like. And if I don't like it, I can change the color of the brush, or I can change the spacing. So I'm just gonna, where's my cursor now? Sometimes it's hard to see where it went. All right, I'm just going to paint a little bit, like so, paint some rain. And this is pretty subtle. I hope you can see it in the video. And I'm just kind of adding it. I don't think you'll be able to see it on top of the buildings anyway, so I'm not worried about going all the way down to the bottom of the frame. Okay. All right, so there's a sort of a rain effect, maybe a little bit up here, more in the corner. Whoop, didn't mean to do that. Go back. There we go. I just meant to paint on the corner there. Okay, maybe up a little bit more in this corner too. And then I can turn this layer off and back on again and decide if I like that rain effect. And I do think that it looks pretty neat there. So, okay, that's it. Again, I can go option, click on the background, look at the regular image, and this one that is more of an abstract, painterly kind of thing with rain. So I'm interested. What do you think? Do you like the original straight image better, or do you like the painterly image, or both? I find them so different that I really like both of them. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and I will see you next time. Bye for now.